The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of the small African town. Children were returning from school, vendors were closing up their stalls, and the air was thick with the familiar hum of evening life. Among the people walking home, there was one girl who seemed to stand out, though not in a way that drew attention to her. She moved with purpose, her dark brown skin glowing under the fading light, her braided hair bouncing lightly with each step, and her eyes alert, scanning the surroundings like a person who knew the world could change in an instant. Her name was Amahle, an ordinary girl in the eyes of her neighbors, but tonight, that ordinary life would collide with extraordinary events. Amahle had always been cautious, the kind of girl who listened to her instincts more than anyone else's advice. She had grown up hearing stories from her mother about the dangers of walking alone at dusk, about strangers who could seem friendly but hide dangerous intentions. But tonight there was a sense of unease that she could not shake off. Something about the rustling in the alleyway ahead, the sudden quiet of the street behind her, made her pulse quicken. She slowed her pace, tightening her grip on the small satchel she carried, feeling the weight of every decision she had ever made that had led her here. It started as a normal walk, the kind she had done countless times. But as she rounded a corner, she noticed a figure struggling in the distance. At first, she thought it might be a simple altercation, a dispute between neighbors perhaps. But as she drew closer, her instincts screamed that something was very wrong. Two men, faces partially covered by cloth, were forcing a man into the back of a dark vehicle. The man was struggling, shouting, and yet the people passing by seemed oblivious. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She had never faced anything like this, but something inside her refused to look away. Without thinking twice, she stepped forward, letting her voice carry over the quiet street. "Hey, let him go!" she shouted, her voice steady despite the fear tightening her throat. The kidnappers turned, momentarily surprised to see a young girl confronting them in the middle of an otherwise empty street. Her bravery was reckless, but in that split second it made all the difference. One of the men snarled, stepping closer, but Amahle was not deterred. She threw herself into a position between the man and his captors, her stance low and balanced, ready to run or fight if necessary. The man being attacked looked at her with a mixture of shock and relief, struggling to get free. He whispered something inaudible to her, eyes wide with panic. The kidnappers, frustrated at this unexpected interruption, grabbed him tighter, pulling him toward the vehicle. Amahle knew she had only seconds to act. She noticed a nearby streetlight with a metal pole. Without hesitation, she swung the pole, striking the tire of the vehicle. The sound of screeching rubber and the sudden halt of the car startled the kidnappers. In the chaos, Amahle grabbed the man's hand, pulling him away from the vehicle. Dragging him into the shadows of a nearby alley where the sounds of the town masked their movements, they ran together, hearts pounding, not stopping until they reached a small, abandoned building on the outskirts of the street. Amahle pushed the man behind some crates, her chest heaving. For a moment, neither spoke, only listening to the distant sounds of the city, ensuring they were not followed. The man finally turned to her, sweat dripping from his brow, and gasped out, "Thank you." "Thank you so much." His voice was shaky, filled with gratitude, but also something else, attention she could not place. Amahle studied him, realizing he wasn't just another traveler or stranger. There was a sense of purpose in his eyes, an intensity that hinted at a life much different from her own. She asked cautiously, "Who are you? Why were they after you?" The man hesitated, as if weighing his words. "It's complicated," he finally said, "and not safe to explain here." He looked around nervously, eyes flicking toward the street. Amahle felt a chill run down her spine, knowing she had stumbled into something far larger than a simple street crime. As the night deepened, she offered him some water from her satchel and tried to calm him down. Her mind raced with questions. Who was he? Why did these men target him specifically? And most importantly, what would happen next? Despite the fear gnawing at her, she felt an undeniable surge of courage. She had acted, she had saved a life, and whatever came next, she would face it head-on. Hours passed, and the city around them seemed to hold its breath. The man finally began to speak, carefully, his voice low. He explained that he had been living undercover for months, investigating a series of criminal operations that had deep ties to powerful people. Amahle listened intently, her earlier fear replaced by a mix of awe and disbelief. This wasn't just a random kidnapping. She had interrupted a calculated, dangerous plan that could have had severe consequences far beyond their neighborhood. Despite the intensity of the revelations, there was a bond forming between them, a quiet understanding. Amahle realized that her quick thinking, her courage, and her willingness to act without hesitation had not only saved him but perhaps prevented a much larger disaster. And yet, as he spoke, he kept glancing toward the horizon as if expecting danger to return at any moment. The tension was palpable, and Amahle's mind buzzed with questions, each more urgent than the last dot. By the time dawn began to creep over the rooftops, the man turned to her with a serious expression, revealing a truth that Amahle could hardly believe. "I can't tell you everything yet," he said, voice steady but firm. "But one day you'll understand who I really am and why tonight mattered more than anything else you've ever done." Amahle stared at him, heart still racing, mind struggling to grasp the magnitude of the night's events. The ordinary life she had known just hours ago seemed impossibly far away. As the first rays of sunlight lit the street, they knew they had to move carefully. The danger was not over, and Amahle's courage had only begun to be tested. But one thing was certain: she had made a difference, and the choices she had made in those tense, fleeting moments would resonate in ways she could not yet comprehend. The night had changed everything, not just for the man she had saved, but for Amahle herself. She had stepped into a world of shadows and secrets, a place where ordinary people could make extraordinary impacts with nothing more than their courage, quick thinking, and unwavering moral instinct. And as they prepared to leave the safe hiding spot, the man looked at her one last time, a faint smile breaking through the tension. "Thank you, Amahle. You have no idea what you've started." Her heart skipped a beat, knowing that the next chapter of this story would reveal truths far beyond what she had imagined, truths that would challenge everything she thought she knew about bravery, danger, and the people around her. As the sun rose higher, the streets that had once felt familiar now seemed foreign, cloaked in the tension of what had transpired the night before. Amahle and the man moved cautiously through the alleys, the quiet of early morning amplifying. Every sound, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, even the soft echo of their footsteps. She kept a firm grip on her satchel and the binder that the man had carried, both of them a lifeline and a symbol of the chaos they had narrowly escaped. "Are you sure we're safe?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, though. Her heartbeat thrummed loudly in her chest. The man glanced at her, his eyes scanning their surroundings with a practiced intensity. "For now," he said, "but we can't stay in one place too long. They're organized, and they will look for me again." There was no fear in his voice, only a calm calculation that both reassured and unnerved her. Amahle studied him as they walked, trying to reconcile the ordinary man she had thought she had saved with the aura of authority and experience that now surrounded him. He moved with precision, taking routes that avoided main streets and large crowds, seemingly anticipating every potential threat before it could even manifest. She realized with a jolt that he wasn't just someone random targeted by criminals. He was someone who had been trained, prepared, and hunted, and somehow she had become part of that reality. After a few minutes, they reached a secluded courtyard behind an old office building, shaded by tall walls and leafy trees. The man finally stopped and turned to face her fully. His eyes were earnest, searching hers, and Amahle felt the weight of what he was about to say. "Amahle," he began, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I couldn't reveal before because it wasn't safe. What you did last night, what you risked, wasn't just an act of bravery. It may have saved far more than just me." Her breath caught in her throat. "Saved you? Or what do you mean?" she asked, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. He looked at her with a seriousness that made her pulse quicken. "I am not who you think I am." I've spent years undercover, working to dismantle networks that most people don't even know exist. I've faced threats, attacks, and attempts on my life before, but last night was different. You interfered at a moment when everything could have been lost, and that makes you part of something much bigger than you realize. Amahle's mind reeled. She had thought of herself as an ordinary girl, courageous perhaps, but ordinary. Now she was being told that her simple, instinctive act had ripple effects across something much larger, something dangerous. But why me? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Why did you trust me, or why did they let me see you? The man paused, the tension between them thickening the air. I didn't know you would intervene, Amahle. But I knew there was a chance you could, and in that there's hope. Most people freeze or run. You acted. That action, that courage, is rare. For a moment they were both silent, the world around them continuing in oblivion, unaware of the invisible battle lines drawn in the shadows. Amahle felt a strange mix of pride, fear, and bewilderment. She had saved someone, yes, but the enormity of what he was revealing was almost impossible to comprehend. She thought back to the night, the kidnappers, the screeching tires, the rush of adrenaline. It all seemed both unreal and significant in ways she could never have imagined. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small, sleek device, handing it to her. This contains everything you need to know about the threat still active and what could happen next. Keep it safe, keep it secret, and trust no one outside this circle. If you do that, you're not just a witness, you're an ally. And allies, in situations like this, can tip the balance between success and disaster. Amahle took the device with trembling hands, feeling its weight, both physical and metaphorical. She had never held something so powerful in her life. As he explained more, Amahle began to understand the stakes. These weren't ordinary criminals. They were part of a network that had connections reaching high into influential circles. They had infiltrated positions, manipulated systems, and hidden behind the very structures meant to maintain order. And in all of this, she, an ordinary girl with no training, had made the decisive move that prevented a tragedy. It was overwhelming, but she felt a new strength building inside her, a combination of resolve, awareness, and responsibility. Hours passed, and the conversation shifted from explanations to planning. The man outlined what he could disclose: steps she could take to protect herself and subtle actions she could do to remain unnoticed yet vigilant. Amahle listened carefully, absorbing every word, every instruction, realizing that her life had irrevocably changed. She was no longer just a girl walking home from school or running errands. She had become a participant in a real-life story of danger, courage, and moral responsibility. By the time the sun reached its peak, Amahle's understanding of the events had solidified. She knew that the moment she had intervened was more than a singular act of bravery. It was a pivot point. That single decision, standing in the street, shouting and pulling a man from danger, had placed her in a new world, a world where choices mattered, stakes were life or death, and courage was a currency more valuable than gold. As they prepared to part ways, the man looked at her one last time with an expression that mixed gratitude, respect, and a hint of lingering worry. Amahle, he said softly but firmly, remember this: the world is full of unseen battles. Not everyone will fight, not everyone will act. But you did, and that makes you extraordinary. Keep your instincts sharp, your mind clear, and your courage steady. The rest will follow. Amahle nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settling onto her shoulders, but also a profound sense of empowerment. She had faced fear, chaos, and uncertainty, and had emerged not just unscathed, but stronger and more aware of the potential impact one person can have. And as she watched him disappear down the alley, blending into the shadows with the skill and precision of someone trained for danger, she realized that her life would never be the same. Walking back to her home, every step felt heavier yet purposeful. The streets she had once navigated casually now held a new significance, every shadow and sound a reminder that vigilance, courage, and action were paramount. And though she could not yet comprehend the full scope of the man's true identity, she knew this: The choices she made tonight, the bravery she displayed, and the decisions she would make in the coming days would define not just her story, but potentially the fate of countless others. As the city settled into its afternoon rhythm, Amahle paused at the top of a small hill, looking back at the streets she had walked, the alleys she had traversed, and the night that had changed everything. She took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of life around her, the quiet hum of a world continuing unaware of the drama that had unfolded. And in that moment, she understood something profound. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is action in the presence of it. And though the man had vanished into secrecy, the knowledge of who he really was would forever linger in her mind. A reminder that ordinary lives can intersect with extraordinary circumstances, that bravery can shift outcomes, and that sometimes the simplest act, stepping forward when others hesitate, can become the most powerful story ever told.